which Ved pertains to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, and is synthesis of yoga uh, taking cues from Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and Veda, or something else?
What the synthesis is based on. Uh, we'll come to that when we come to integral yoga. But what Sri Aurobindo has done is to preserve the spirit of yoga, which in fact had started getting overshadowed by the external form. And we can understand it because even today it continues to be overshadowed by techniques such as asanas, pranayamas, and meditation, which are the visible aspects of yoga, which are the external form which yoga takes. So since the external had come to dominate the field of yoga to such an extent that the spirit underlying yoga was being subordinated, Sri Aurobindo undertook this synthesis. And in this synthesis, the effort has been made to understand these various schools such as Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, and so on, in light of the spirit of yoga, which did underlie all these schools but got forgotten. So while the spirit has been preserved, and also the basic principle, such as in case of Hatha Yoga, that the body should not be neglected and should be taken good care of. Similarly, from Raja Yoga, that the mind also should be taken into account while practicing yoga. We should try to improve the functioning of the mind. While all this basic principle has been accepted, the synthesis did not go to such an extreme that the person would spend all the time either perfecting the body or perfecting the mind. I think your question also included, is it based on the Vedas? Now, in a way, yes, everything is based on the Vedas because that is the most ancient spiritual literature that we have. And there's a continuity from the Vedas to the Upanishads. However, there is a transition we find from the Vedas to the Upanishads and from the Upanishads to the Gita. And the transition roughly is like this, that in case of the Vedas, there's a lot of symbolic language used, and there is quite a bit of space given to various rituals. In the case of the Upanishads, it is pure philosophy and very cryptic sometimes, and to such an extent that it becomes difficult to understand ordinarily. So Upanishads have that. Gita overcomes the limitations of both. It doesn't talk about any rituals. It is rather brief. But unlike the Upanishads, which are also brief sometimes, unlike the Upanishads, it makes yoga very user-friendly, easier to understand. The context of a story, stories are easier to understand than abstract philosophy. It solves a problem. So anything which has a problem-solving approach is more appealing. And then the Lord himself gives the assurance that every step that you take will bring you something, and you can turn to me whichever way you like, through action, knowledge, or devotion. All types of devotees are acceptable to me. So that makes the whole approach very user-friendly and brings yoga to the common man. So Sri Aurobindo has taken into account the basic principles of primarily these three traditional schools of yoga and worked out a synthesis so that, in Gita, you'll find that it's Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga leans heavily on the yoga of the Gita. But then in the Gita also there are certain things which are not there. For example, the Gita does not talk about keeping your body healthy through asanas and a good diet, etc. There's hardly anything about that. The Gita does not talk much about how to perfect the mind through the technique like meditation, which Raja Yoga does in great detail, but the Gita talks only briefly in the 6th chapter. So there is, Sri Aurobindo has sort of in the synthesis kept all that in mind, and that is how it becomes, in a way, complete. Integral means complete. So integral yoga is a complete yoga, which takes into account all the important features of the major traditional schools of yoga, and yet in a way goes beyond them. And how it goes beyond them, that we'll see when we talk about integral yoga.